Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where every day we explore the latest in technology and its impact on business and our lives and even world. And today I've got a great guest joining us. His story will stay with you long after this episode. His name is Dan Woods. He is a former FBI special agent and CIA cyber operations officer, and now the global head of intelligence at F5. I'm going to have to be on my best behaviour today, aren't I? But in this episode, we'll be diving deep into the world of fraud protection and bot protection. And Dan is going to help us all understand how bots work and how to mitigate their impact. And he will also provide specific examples of how bots are being used maliciously against everything from banks, hotels, airlines, insurance companies, and social media sites. And we will also explore the surge in marketplaces, such as the invite-only Genesis Marketplace, which did provide an avenue for attackers to buy digital fingerprints. And finally, we'll also discuss what organisations can do to address the bot threats and why it's essential to have a neutral third-party validation of any bot traffic. So grab your headphones, buckle up and hold on tight, because it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to Utah for an eye-opening conversation with Dan Woods from F5 right here on Tech Talks Daily. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Dan. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name's Dan Woods. I'm the global head of intelligence at F5. And what that means is I pore over billions of transactions that flow through the F5 security infrastructure every day, working with data scientists and engineers to pull out interesting insights. And then I turn those insights into briefings that I share with our customers and security experts across the globe.
Well, I'm excited to get you on the podcast today. And I always ask my guests to share their origin story with everybody listening, especially where their passion for technology came from, what might have put them on the path they're on today. But after doing a little research on you, Dan, I learned that you're a former FBI special agent and CIA cyber operations officer and now global head of intelligence at F5. So I'm not sure how much you can tell me without having to kill me. So can I ask you share the redacted version of your origin story?
Yeah, sure. In fact, most people are drawn to my experience as an FBI agent and as a CIA operations officer. But prior to that, I was actually a police officer. I was working a beat in the Phoenix area in Arizona. And that really made an impression on me, going from call to call to call all day, seeing really what I describe as just endless manifestations of ignorance. It changed my life. In fact, prior to becoming a cop, I had attended college at Arizona State University, and I had failed in every respect. I got terrible grades and ended up just dropping out altogether. And then after being a cop for a few years, I decided to return to college. And I was the same person. I wasn't any smarter. But in my second attempt at college, with kind of the wisdom of working a beat for several years, it was an entirely different experience. I got virtually all A's, an occasional B, earned the Distinguished Senior in Computer Systems Engineering Award. And I attribute that to the lessons learned from kind of working a beat and handling all those calls for service. And then I was most interested when you combine a law enforcement background and computer engineering. It's natural to kind of conclude, something in cybersecurity. So I wanted to do cybersecurity and law enforcement, but working a beat just didn't satisfy that need. So that's when I left and joined CIA as a cyber operations officer, and I loved that job. It was a great, great job. I traveled the world, helping our human intelligence sources collect information of interest to U.S. policymakers. And then I was 36 years old. And what you and many of your listeners may not know is that the FBI has an age restriction. You must go through Quantico to become a special agent when you are younger than 37, because it's mandatory retirement at 57 and you must have 20 years in. So at 36, I was facing this decision. Do I become an FBI agent then, or do I miss out on the opportunity altogether? So I decided to become an FBI agent. I did that for a few years and then returned to CIA, where I continued on my path as a cyber operations officer. So that's kind of where I got my early interest in cybersecurity. And over the last 30 years, I've been pursuing that interest.
Wow, what an incredibly cool backstory. And what, 2,400 interviews, that's got to be right up there. And the main reason that I invited you on the podcast today, though, was to talk a little bit more about fraud protection and bot detection. And bearing in mind with your vast experience in this space, can you set the scene and explain how bot works and also how to mitigate attacks?
Yeah, I sure can. In fact, that's been my passion for the last 7 or 8 years, as I've worked for a startup in Silicon Valley called Shape Security, which was acquired by F5 a few years ago. It's what I've been living and breathing for this entire time. So I guess to start, we should make clear that not all bots are bad.
Yeah.
On one end of the spectrum, you have a Google bot, which makes, web pages easier to search. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have a bot that does, say, credential stuffing, which is when a bad actor is trying hundreds of millions, even billions of username password pairs that are spilled, they're available on the dark net or spilled from another enterprise. And he is trying them all programmatically against the login applications of other companies. And because of consumer habits to reuse usernames and passwords, these attacks end up taking over anywhere from 0.1 to 3% of the attempted accounts. So when you're trying, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions, you end up taking over an awful lot of accounts. So with those as bookends, you have all sorts of automation that kind of falls in between. Other clearly malicious automation would be gift card cracking. All you need to steal a gift card balance is the 16-digit card number and the PIN, and there's a finite number of those, so bad actors use bots to enumerate all of them. And once they find one with value, they're able to steal it. And then moving a little bit closer to the gray area, you might have sneaker bots. These are customers who are using bots to buy sneakers. And they're limited time offer, typically, limited time offer sneakers that are usually several $100s, and then they sell them on the secondary market for thousands of dollars. And we actually did a workup on an organization that was launching these sorts of, not attacks. I think attack is probably a little dramatic to describe a sneaker bot, but this type of automation. And it isn't a couple 20-somethings making a few extra €1,000. It's somebody making millions of US dollars by buying these limited time offer products and reselling them on the secondary market. And then moving further to the less criminal and more innocent would be third-party scrapers, online travel agents that are scraping the fares at hotels and airlines. Almost non-stop, just to make those fares and airlines available to people who are looking to travel. So there are a lot of bots out there, and all of them fall somewhere on this continuum. Now, you also asked, Neil, how do you mitigate these? And this is something that I've dealt with literally at this point hundreds of enterprises who I've talked to about how they were attempting to mitigate this type of automation. And typically what they're trying to do is mitigate by IP address or maybe region, geography, autonomous system. But unfortunately, bots can change all those attributes very, very quickly. So that is a fool's errand. And many enterprises, they'll try that for months, sometimes years, until finally they wind up at a 5's doorstep. And the way we mitigate these is by using what I refer to as client-side signals. We interrogate the device, we look at user behavior, behavioral biometrics, We look certainly at network attributes, device attributes, and all these signals taken together give us a very, very clear indication as to whether the traffic is not only from a bot or from a human, but we also know the intent. We know the objective. We know if it's malicious automation or benign automation. We can even tell if it's a good human or a bad human based on these client-side signals. So that's really the only way to deal with some of this motivated automation. Some people will try CAPTCHAs, but that doesn't work. It used to work 10 years ago, but now bots are using human click farms to solve CAPTCHAs. And I went to work actually for a short time at a human click farm, this Russian human click farm called 2CAPTCHA. I went through their training and their testing, and then I was hired and I was solving CAPTCHAs for bots, trying to make a little extra money. And I think I had solved 40 or 50 CAPTCHAs at the time, and I hadn't earned 1 penny US yet. So it's very, very exploitative. So now I still see CAPTCHAs, but I think really all they do is provide a lot of friction for legitimate customers, and they really don't do anything to stop the bots.
I think everyone will agree with you on that friction there. And the news that we go through that friction, jump through the hoops, and it still doesn't solve the actual problem is a little bit heartbreaking. And I know you said that not all bots are bad, but just to bring to life some of the things that we're talking about here, can I ask that you share a few specific examples of how bots are being used maliciously against areas like banks, hotels, airlines, insurance, and social media sites, etc., just to bring it to life for everyone listening?
Sure. So the two I mentioned, like credential stuffing, for example, that impacts all verticals. If any company has a public-facing login, it could be the consumer login, it could be an employee login, a partner portal, supplier login. If it's accessible on the web, then bots will launch credential stuffing attacks against it. And there is no non-malicious credential stuffing. If it's credential stuffing, they're attempting to take over accounts and engage in some sort of a fraud or intelligence gathering. So that affects all verticals. Gift card cracking typically affects any enterprise that has gift cards, store value cards. That's typically e-commerce and retail. And maybe insurance rate scraping. I remember coming across an insurance company who was really worried about bots navigating the insurance quote workflow. And, they're spending tens of millions of dollars, perhaps more, studying data and hiring, actuarial scientists, crunching all this data to come up with their pricing. And then a competitor or third party comes and effectively reverse engineers the pricing using automation at the insurance quote workflow online. So that's just a few examples of how they're impacting various verticals. And sometimes even the non-malicious automation can have very negative consequences, like an online travel agent or OTA scraping a hotel's room rates. That's good for the hotel because anyone using that online travel agent is then, some of them are going to pick that hotel. And so it's going to generate revenue. So it's good for a hotel when these online travel agents scrape their rates. Although you might have noticed last time you made a reservation, once you selected the city and the dates and the room, that room was typically held for 15 minutes to give you a chance to go get your credit card and complete the reservation process. Well, when bots are scraping the rates, they can sometimes freeze the entire inventory for 15 minutes, which obviously is a very negative consequence of what should be benign automation. So that's just a few examples. On the social media front, that problem is really, it's much worse, in my opinion, because it has the ability. I think what you could accomplish if you had programmatic control over 10 million Twitter accounts or TikTok accounts or Instagram or Facebook, think about the product reviews you could engage in. Think about the topics you could cause to trend. If there's a truth that you want to bury, you could probably use your programmatic control over all of these social media accounts to bury that truth or amplify a lie. So it's really important for these social media companies to take aggressive steps to prevent fake accounts and automation, but many of them aren't because they have a reverse incentive. You think about a social media company; their value is derived largely from the number of daily active users. Who wants to be that employee in the conference room saying, "Hey, I'd like to get budget and staff to prove that 2/3 of our users are fake." That person is not going to get the budget. So they have a reverse incentive. They don't really want to know how many of the accounts are fake, because if they learned the true number, it would decrease the value of their company. And I firmly believe, based on all of my experience and a lot of data that I've seen, that state actors, in no doubt, are using automation on social media companies for the sole purpose of influencing public opinion. And in the U.S., when elections are won or lost by a few thousand votes, I think that state actors can actually change the outcome of elections. So it isn't as obviously malicious as fraud, but if you think beyond the bumper sticker talk and really have a thoughtful and deliberate discussion about the consequences of unwanted automation in social media companies, you can only come to the conclusion that it could be devastating on a democracy.
Yeah, it really can. And I think that's something we've seen on both sides of the pond in recent years. And love him or hate him, Elon Musk also highlighted the issue when he went to buy Twitter, of course, with the valuation of the company and the amount of bot accounts on the platform. It is much bigger than many people think, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. In fact, he was estimating a lot, and I think Twitter was estimating 5%, which isn't even close. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, I created a fake Twitter account just to do some research. Then I paid less than $1,000 US, and I gave my Twitter account over 100,000 followers. They were all fake. I just bought them.
Yeah.
And then I even wrote a script that, for testing purposes, wrote a script that automatically creates Twitter accounts. And, I'm not even a programmer, and I was able to write a script in a weekend that successfully got around whatever countermeasures Twitter had. So it's easy to do. There's an incentive. There's a marketplace built around it. There's no doubt in my mind that that state actors are probably really having just a field day on Twitter and other social media companies. In fact, I wrote a blog and did several interviews, where I predicted it's more like 8 out of 10 Twitter accounts are fake. I believe, based on my experience and data that I've seen. And when I said that in an interview, it somehow got on Elon Musk's radar, and he tweeted it. So he tweeted a link to the interview and my picture. So you can imagine how my phone exploded when that happened. But I tell you, there's some good news, though. I mean, before Elon acquired Twitter and before that deal closed, I felt confident 8 in 10 were fake. But since the deal closed, and since Elon has been putting a lot more attention on stopping bots, my roughly 105,000 followers dropped over time to 60,000, and then to 40,000, and now I think it's down to around 20,000. So he's doing a lot better at identifying the fake accounts, but there's still a lot of room to improve, because I know that I could, if I wanted to, I could just buy 1,000 more, and I could just keep buying them. And instead of buying what they call, you could buy what they call sticky followers, which means they look really, really human. They're not. They're all still fake accounts. They're all still controlled by bots, but they're more expensive. So those are the ones he hasn't gotten yet. And I suspect he never will, not until he takes on, takes on somebody like F5 to help them really identify the more sophisticated automation.
Wow, that's absolutely incredibly eye-opening too. And another thing, before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little research and I was reading that there's a surge in marketplaces such as Genesis, which I think it provides an avenue essentially for attackers to buy digital fingerprints. Again, sounds terrifying, but can you expand on that for me?
Yeah, Genesis is a marketplace I've been tracking now for the last 4 or 5 years. It's not exclusively on the dark web, and it's a mistake a lot of people make. It's if you go to the URL and if there's interest, I could provide it. You agreed with the login screen, and that is at least before law enforcement took it down. We could talk about that in a minute, but you agreed with the login screen. It was invitation only. If you got an account, you could log in and you could buy not just usernames and passwords, but you could buy many of the environment and browser attributes from the victim's machine that allowed you to replicate the victim's browser. So, have you ever encountered a second factor of authentication because you were coming from a new device? I think we've all encountered that, right? You go to log in from a new computer or a new phone, and the web application says something like, "We don't recognize your device," and then it triggers a second factor of authentication. Well, the whole Genesis marketplace was built to get around that countermeasure. So now, if I'm a bad actor and I buy all of these attributes from Genesis and I convert my browser into a replica of the victim's browser, then when I go to log in, I'm not asked for that second factor because my browser is a replica of the victim's. So the enterprise doesn't recognize me as a bad guy. They think I'm the victim, and they don't trigger that second factor of authentication. So there were roughly about 500,000 of these collections. They called them bots, but this kind of a misnomer. Each collection was, or each of these so-called bots was a collection of usernames and passwords and a browser and environment attributes for an infected machine. And there were about 500,000 in there when it was shut down. That may not seem like a lot, but when you buy a bot, it's removed from the marketplace, and bots typically last a few weeks to a few months. So really, 500,000 in the marketplace at any one time really corresponds to millions of these so-called bots passing through the marketplace every few weeks or months. So yeah, the marketplace was a really dangerous and it victimized thousands and thousands of people, sadly.
And listening to those figures there, it just sound incredibly scary. How easy is it for attackers, or was it easy for attackers to buy stolen digital fingerprints through the purchase of bots? Is it as easy as it sounds?
Yes, it's very, very easy. In fact, Genesis had a very impressive user experience and customer support system. When I got my account, I for testing purposes, purchased some of these so-called bots and started creating fingerprints. And anytime I encountered any sort of challenge, I would just submit a ticket, and they'd respond very, very quickly, helping me. One thing that surprised me, Neil, is that they responded in perfect, educated native English. I did not expect that, because also on the website before it was taken down, there was a quote from memory, something like, "If you're a member of the Commonwealth of Independent State Countries, you will not be negatively impacted by Genesis." And so their loyalty was clear. Those former USSR states, not exactly known for their native English speaking, but their customer support was in perfect English. So my suspicion is they used a third party for some of their customer support. But yeah, it's very easy to buy them, very easy to use them. What I would do is when I bought them, I would work with maybe a journalist somewhere, or I personally would reach out to the victim to let them know that the machine was infected. What we wanted to do was get a copy of the malware that was populating the Genesis marketplace. And the only way to identify the true identity of a victim was to buy the bot. So we did that several times, collected various types of intelligence about how the malware was deployed. For example, one victim relayed to me, because when you buy the bot, you can see the date and time the malware was installed on the victim's machine. So you could just ask the victim, what were you doing yesterday at 3 p.m.?
Yeah.
And they think about it and they say, oh, that's when I downloaded a YouTube video converter. So typically then we know, okay, that's some YouTube video converter. This executable file was how the malware was delivered to the victim's machine. Another victim told me that his teenage son wanted to visit some questionable sites, so turned off the antivirus, visited the questionable sites, forgot to turn the antivirus back on, and when the father turned it back on, it immediately detected the malware and removed it. But what he didn't realize is that during the short time the malware was on the machine, it collected all their usernames and passwords. So he wasn't thinking that he needed to change anything until I reached out to him. So we were able to protect many victims, thankfully.
Wow. And you mentioned there about the customer support and how it was perfect English. I'm curious, do you think with the rise of generative AI and tools like ChatGPT, do you think that's something we're going to see more and more of?
Yeah, probably. I think that they'll use AI and chat bots to handle a lot of customer support. I'm not the alarmist that a lot of security experts are when it comes to AI.
Yeah.
Only because I don't think bad actors need it to make a lot of money. It's really easy to make a lot of money doing cyber attacks. So I guess as soon as it's really hard and they need to overcome some countermeasure, and the only way to do that is by using AI, that's when you'll see criminal organizations adopting AI in a much broader way. But just the existence of AI isn't enough for a criminal organization to adopt it. They need to be incentivized to adopt it. And maybe customer support, that certainly would be a task that it could handle. Perhaps even writing, more believable phishing emails, because let's face it, some of the phishing emails we receive are not very good. Yeah. So AI will be able to improve the quality of phishing emails. Also, social engineering, which to me is one of the biggest threats. Social engineering is sadly always going to be effective. But AI is going to be able to really kind of amplify, be a kind of a force multiplier for a criminal organization that, if there's 5 people who are really good at social engineering, maybe with AI, those 5 people could social engineer, like 1,000 people. So there's a lot of badness that could come from the AI, but I don't think the sky's falling quite yet.
And you mentioned a few moments ago when you were talking about the examples, everything from hotels to airlines to social media, etc. So the big question is, for any business leader listening, what can organizations do to better address bots, and why do they need neutral third-party validation of bot traffic too?
Well, I think that it's not a DIY project, definitely not a do-it-yourself project. I've advised many organizations, and they were trying to do it themselves for months, sometimes years, and they just they're not successful because they just don't have the skill set to collect the right kind of client-side signals that identify the really sophisticated automation. In fact, quickly, what's interesting is when we go in line and deploy our signals and look at the traffic, and we determine, but these are actual numbers. We've determined that 98 and even 99 and even 99.9% of all traffic hitting an application was from malicious bots. When we first saw that, it was jaw-dropping for me. I mean, and I look, my background, I've seen a lot of fascinating things in my career, but when I got to F5 and I started seeing that 98 and 99% of all traffic is from malicious bots, that was hard for me to wrap my head around. At first we thought maybe there's a mistake, like there's something wrong with our signal or our telemetry, but now we see it much more regularly. So it's a significant problem. But when we go in line and we see, say, 60% automation, we look at the level of sophistication of the automation, and we typically see unsophisticated automation, typically. So what that means is this enterprise is doing battle with the attacker, and the attacker is able to overcome their countermeasures without really increasing in sophistication. And by the way, that was true even when we go in line at a large enterprise with $1 billion security budget and a 100-person security team. We thought for sure when we went in line after an organization like that was doing battle with the bots, that we go in line and we'd see really sophisticated automation, but we didn't. We never do. We go in line, we see unsophisticated automation, no matter how long the enterprise has been doing battle with the attackers, and no matter what their budgets and their skill levels are, because they're just going about it the wrong way. So yeah, it's they need to, partner with somebody who understands client-side signals. And of course, since I work for F5, I know what our client-side signals are, and they're incredibly effective at detecting malicious traffic.
And for people listening and they're hearing big numbers like that, 99% of traffic belonging to bots, etc., and they're hearing about all the scary things you've seen throughout your career as well, what is that one takeaway that you'd like a business leader to take away from listening to this conversation today? Because we've probably set off a lot of alarm bells, and also obviously we're talking about solutions as well, but what would you like people to walk away with from this conversation?
I guess that the very first step in doing anything about it is gaining visibility. You just have to gain visibility to quantify the size of the problem, because a lot of times enterprises, they're thinking, well, the amount of fraud we have is X million, and we have a budget to allow for 10X million. Therefore, why would we spend any money trying to stop the bots when there isn't a lot of, our fraud levels are acceptable? And what we have to remind them is, look, it isn't just fraud that is costing you money. When you have 98% automated traffic, think about the costs associated with a CDN, or a fraud tool or infrastructure. Think about all the extra CPU that's being burned. I mean, if you really want to focus on being green and using the least amount of power, then wouldn't it make sense to get rid of 98% of all of the traffic? So there are all sorts of other costs associated with that much automation. It isn't just about losses due to fraud. It's increased calls to customer service. It's a decreased performance for legitimate customers. Costs associated with any tool that charges per transaction. It's significant. It really is.
And what about yourself at F5? I appreciate it's probably not too much you can share, but is there anything you can share about what your big focus is this year?
Well, we're always trying to stay ahead of the next, the next sophisticated bot. So what we do is we acquire all the automation frameworks, all the bots. We acquire them. People smarter than I am reverse engineer them, and then we develop more and more advanced client-side signals to detect them. So we're just trying to stay ahead of the sophistication level of the current threat landscape. And right now, I feel great about where we're at, because all of our customers across the F5 network enjoy less than 1% of all of their traffic being unwanted. Less than 1%. Where like I said, we go in line and sometimes, it's 30 or 40, 50%, and sometimes as much as 99%. So when we bring them down to 1%, it's a good place to be. It's a very rewarding company to work for, that's for sure.
I think that's a beautiful, positive moment to end our conversation today. But before I let you go, I always like to end on a light-hearted note, and I'm going to ask you to leave everyone listening with one further insight, one final gift, and that is a book that has inspired you or share or means something to you, or a song that means something to you. The song can go on a Spotify playlist, the book can go on an Amazon wish list. The choice is yours, but all I'm going to say is, what are you going to leave us with today and why?
I would say a book, and it really is consistent with the theme that we've been talking about, and it's Freakonomics by Levitt and Dubner. Freakonomics is all about analyzing the data and drawing conclusions based on what the data say. And so often we go into enterprises and they believe what they want to believe. They believe what a limited set of data indicates. They suffer from confirmation bias. They're not completely objective about their vulnerability. They underestimate the sophistication of the attackers. And I would try to encourage them, look, just gain visibility, get access to the data, and then make data-driven decisions. And when they do that, they're making much, much better decisions. So I think Freakonomics is a book I read very early in my career that really emphasized that to me, that the importance of just understanding the data, being objective in the way you interpret it, and making decisions based on that, and not being so influenced by, what you want the data to show, and instead just focus on what the data actually show.
Well, a big thank you for coming on the podcast today. And for anyone listening that wants to maybe dig a little bit deeper on these topics, maybe they want to contact your team or just have a browse around and see how you can help at F5. What's the best starting point for everything and how people can find out more about your work?
Yeah, I am not on any social media. That may not come as a surprise to you. I don't even have a LinkedIn. But F5 has, of course, got a Twitter account and LinkedIn and a website. It's on all social media. So yeah, if you just go to the f5.com, you can read all about F5's solutions.
Awesome. Well, I love chatting with you today. We covered so much in a short amount of time, from fraud protection, bot detection, the surge in marketplaces such as Genesis Marketplace, buying digital fingerprints, etc., and so much more about how we can address bots and why we need neutral third-party validation of that bot traffic. But more than anything, just a big thank you, Dan, for sharing your insights today and inspiring backstory.
You're very welcome. And I guess to end on one more additional positive note, just huge kudos go to the FBI and all of their law enforcement partners for finally taking down that marketplace. That the internet is safer because of it. And I, having worked for the Bureau for a short time, I know how difficult that must have been. So hats off to the case agents who made it possible. I hope to meet him or her someday and hear their backstory.
Wow. A huge thank you to Dan Woods for sharing his expert insights into fraud protection, bot protection, and the dark world of digital footprints. And also for the news that we all knew all along. Capture codes are just not any good. They don't fix the problem and just cause us friction points. But it's clear that organisations do need to be more proactive in addressing the threat of bots, and that third-party validation of bot traffic is essential in maintaining a secure online environment. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did today, and hopefully it provided you with a few insights into the ever-evolving world of cyber threats, fraud and bots, etc. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future topics you'd like us to feature on here, feel free to email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @NeilCHughes. I'd love to keep this conversation going with each and every one of you. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious, keep exploring the world of technology with us every day. And until next time, don't be a stranger.